My name is Jess, and I'm a developer advocate with Twitter, and I'm here to talk with you about how I solved a parking problem in my life with Python. And let me know if this inspires you to create anything. You can tweet at me at Jessica Carson, or feel free to send me a message. It always makes my day when people build based on my work. Also, code for today can be found at github.com/twitterdev/parking. Um, and if you take a look at the site, at the GitHub repository, you can notice that there's a folder called Recent Search, and in there you'll find the code that we're using today. Also, there's some resources that could be helpful as you're building, and there's a link to a blog post version of this talk too that I'll be giving at the end of this talk as well. So you might be wondering what was happening in my life that inspired me to build a solution with Python. So I live in Brooklyn, New York, and you might be noticing on this really cool cosmic looking car that there is this orange envelope on it. That's a parking ticket. And parking tickets in New York City can be fairly expensive. They can run you up to over $100, so you really want to avoid getting a parking ticket. I'm sure some people watching right now are nodding their heads in agreement. I had a problem in my life. I had a car in New York, and I was moving my car too much. I was really good at creating a nightly routine. I looked at traffic pattern data, figured out what time of day the traffic was the lightest. It was 8 p.m. at night, and had this routine of every night at 8 p.m. I would go and take a walk and move my car and then walk back home. And it typically took me about a half an hour every night, but it was part of my nightly routine. I was pretty good about it. But you're probably like, hey, so why were you even doing this to begin with? What are these alternate side of the street parking restrictions anyways? So alternate side of the street parking restrictions, or ASP as they're known in New York, are a rule that enforces the clearing of parked cars to accommodate a street cleaning schedule. So basically, a street cleaning truck will come through, and in my neighborhood, that takes place on the right side of the street on Mondays and Thursdays between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m., and on the left side of the street between 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. on Tuesdays and Fridays. Meaning for me, most nights of the week, I had to move my car by 8 a.m. So yeah, it wasn't fun. And one night I was driving around my neighborhood looking for parking at 8 p.m., driving around, and I couldn't find parking. And I was like, this is really unusual. I went to all my usual spots and couldn't find anything. There were cars everywhere. Finally found a spot after 2 hours, but it was fine. I was listening to a book on tape. It was great. But I got home and I talked to my roommate, and they were like, where were you? And I was like, oh, I was moving my car. They're like, really? You didn't go to a show or a party, or you didn't run into someone you knew? And I was like, nope, just moving my car. And they were like, do you know about this Twitter handle, NYCASP, which stands for New York City Alternate Side of Street Parking, and it tweets daily at 7:30 and 4 p.m. and during emergency situations. And I started looking through the tweets, and I was like, oh, wow, I've been moving my car way too much. And I would also leave social events early. Sometimes my schedule would revolve around moving my car, literally. So I was like, the tweets all look kind of the same too. I was like, I think I can automate this. So I built a solution using Twitter data and Twilio to send myself a text message whenever I don't have to move my car. So let's talk a little bit about an overview of the solution. I needed to get the tweets from NYCASP. I needed to see if the words suspended and tomorrow appeared in the same tweet. I needed to get a text message when the right words appeared. I needed to run this on a server so it repeated, so I didn't have to do anything manually. It just would happen every day. And so at a high level, the process for creating this app was really simple. There were only 3 steps that I had to do. I had to get the tweets that I wanted from the Twitter API. I needed to connect to Twilio, and I needed to get a text when I didn't have to move my car. So it seemed like this was actually something that was pretty easy and simple to do. Um, and so I challenge all of you to start to think about the problems that you face in your everyday life, that there might be solutions that you can engineer to resolve. So, if you wanted to build a solution, if you also live in New York and have a car, and you wanted to build this solution or something similar, you might be wondering, what will I need to get started? You will need to create a Twitter app, which allows you to connect to the API. And you can apply for access at developer.twitter.com/en/apply for access. And you would also need to sign up for labs at t.co.labs. Again, that's t.co.labs. We have an internal link shortener. So you might be seeing a lot of these t.co links throughout the presentation. And currently, we're in the midst of rebuilding the future of the Twitter API with Twitter Developer Labs. And this allows you to have early access to new endpoints, features, and new versions and things like that. And so we use labs to test out new ideas and we have a bunch of different previews. And we invite the developer community to share their feedback to help shape our roadmap moving forward. So we have a preview for an endpoint called Recent Search, and you will also need to enroll in that preview to get the tweets from the past 7 days. You'll also need a Twilio account, and you can check out their documentation on getting started. You will also need to pip install the libraries Twilio.rest, Pandas, and Requests. Twilio.rest allows us to connect to the Twilio API. Pandas will allow us to shape the data and get into a data frame so we can kind of get a fuller picture of what we're looking at when we start to work with the data, and you'll see that in a few minutes here. And Requests allows us to actually make the request to the Twitter API. So now we're gonna start to take a look at the code. So the first code sample that we're going to look at is a code sample called Twilio Connect demo.py, and you can also find a version of this inside of the GitHub repository. And in there, we will first start off by importing in OS. That will allow us to create environment variables so we don't have to pass any secrets directly in this code, which is pretty exciting. It's a way to make sure that our code is a bit more secure than it would be. We're also going to import in a helper function called client from the Twilio.rest library that we pip installed earlier. And so from here, we're going to take a look at a function called Twilio Connect. And I like to think of this function as if it was a secret handshake. So you're going to like a really cool party and you have to like give a secret handshake to a bouncer. That's kind of the same sort of thing. But instead of going into a party, you are going to be authenticated into an API. And in this case, it's going to be Twilio. So Twilio, again, is what allows us to send the text message. So from here, we're going to want to create we're going to want to use our account SID, and we're going to want to create an environment variable. So inside of our terminal, we would just type something that looks like this for each of the secrets that we're going to want to pass in. So for here, it's the account SID, the auth token, our Twilio phone number, and our cell phone number. So this helps keep things a little bit more secure. So to get the account SID, we're going to actually get the environment variable by using the OS library from the, and that's included in the standard library as well. So it's os.environment.get, and we're going to get the account SID, and we're going to do the same thing for the auth token as well. And then we're going to pass this in through the client helper just to authenticate, and that's the client helper function. And we're going to return that client variable as well. So from here, then we can start to really get into what I consider to be one of the most fun parts of the code, which is where we decide what the text message will say. So it's this one function, and it's def And then we're going to define this function as send message, and we're going to pass in the client object that we just defined. And from here, we're going to do client.messages.create, and it's going to be from our Twilio phone number. That's the number that you get from Twilio. And then we're going to send it to our cell phone, and it's going to say, for the purposes of today, you don't have to move your car tonight. Enjoy your night. Super exciting. And that's the Twilio Connect helper script. So it's just these two functions. From here, I like to actually, for the next part of this, run this in a Jupyter notebook. And that just allows us to kind of interact with the data a little bit more robustly. We can actually start to see the input and the output all in one screen. So I always like working with data type things inside of a Jupyter notebook. It's a very nice experience. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to import pandas as PD. That's going to allow us to shape the data later on. We're also going to import YAML and JSON, and we don't have to pip install these two things. They actually come included with the standard library. YAML will allow us to pass in a configuration file. That's a YAML file. And JSON will allow us to work with the object coming from the API. And requests is something that you will have to pip install, but that allows you to make a request to the API. So let's run that. Cool. And then from here, the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to actually import in that Twilio connection script, and we're going to want to import in Twilio Connect and send message. And then from here, we're going to want to make sure that we pass NYC-ASP into the URL. And we're going to want to print it out just to make sure it looks right. So the query is that it's going to be equal to from the handle NY or colon and then the handle NYC-ASP. And so you can actually see the full URL here that we get back, which is pretty exciting. And then for the next part of this, we're going to want to do another step of authentication. But this time, instead of to the Twilio API, we're going to want to authenticate into the Twitter API. And I like to do it with a configuration file. You will want to make sure that you don't save this into your GitHub repository. Make sure that you include this secret file in your .gitignore file. YAML is kind of like JSON, but without the quotes is a good way of thinking about it. So from here, we have an object called search tweets API, and then inside of that we have another object called bearer token, which is where we would pass in our bearer token. Bearer tokens are one of the key features of OAuth 2, and they're really great because you don't have to pass in much more. In our documentation, we actually have a curl command that you can run, but you can also create some Python to run that as well. But yeah, working with bearer tokens is really great because you don't have to pass in that much more. So from here, we're going to want to load in our YAML file, save that into an object called data, and then from here, we actually want to extract out the bearer token. So we have the bearer token, and we're going to set that equal to data, and then we're going to slice out the search tweets API object, and then we're going to get the bearer token from there. And then we need to pass that into the headers to actually make the request and do the authorization. So inside of a variable called headers, we would want to pass in authentication, and then we're going to say that the authentication method that we're going to use is a bearer token, and we're going to format that bearer token inside of there, and then we're going to pass it. Since we're going to be getting tweets, we're going to make a GET request since we're searching for tweets, and we're going to want to pass in the URL. And then we're going to also want the headers to be equal to headers, which is that variable that we've just looked at. And then from here, we're going to want to make sure that the encoding is correct. And then if everything is, then we want to go through each of the lines, and we're going to want to put that inside of a variable to get the JSON object back out. And so from here, we can actually print out our JSON data. And so the full object actually up here has two different objects inside of it. There's data, which has the last 10 tweets. And then there's also meta, which has next tokens and lets you know how many results you'll get back and things like that. But for the purposes of today, we only need the last 10 tweets just to be able to make sure that everything's running all right and debug if needed. So from here, we can actually, since we don't need the meta object, we can actually just get the data only. So here's just the full data only object. And then from here, I like to pass that into a data frame just because it makes it a little bit easier to work with and a little bit easier to look at. So from here, let's run this. And then we can get back a data frame which has the tweets and the IDs. So it has the text of the tweet and the ID, which is pretty cool to look at. So you can actually take a look and you can kind of see that the text seems really similar. And that's what really allows this to work so well, is that they only use certain words. So it was really easy to kind of parse this out and create a solution that worked for me. So there is this client function this client variable that we created, that we can create just by calling the Twilio connect. And that's, again, what's going to allow us to connect to Twilio. And from here, that there's this logic statement that basically allows us to see if the words suspended and tomorrow appear in the text of the tweet. So it's pretty exciting. And then if the words suspended and tomorrow appear in this nested statement, then it sends the message. I like having helper print statements just because it helps me debug. You can also add in more robust logging as well if you're doing something a little bit more complicated. But for my purpose, print statements were pretty useful. And then if not, then I say not today, friend. And if it's not, then, but it looks like New York City alternate side of street parking restrictions are not in effect tomorrow. So we should get a text. Oh, wow, I did get a text. Super exciting. And you might be wondering, what does that look like? So if the right conditions are met, I get a text that says, you don't have to move your car tonight. Enjoy your night, Jess. And that's what it looks like on my server. It used to be running at 11:30 a.m. and 5 p.m., but these days I actually have it only running at 5 p.m. So let's talk a little bit about deployment. I currently have this deployed to a DigitalOcean server, but I've thought about doing something a little bit more serverless, like using a Lambda function. And I'm currently just using a cron job to set it to send me a text at 5 p.m. every day. So the conclusion of this talk, you might be wondering, why didn't you make this so you do get a text when you have to move your car instead of when you don't? And this is a question that people always ask. And honestly, I was very good at moving my car. Almost too good at it. I had this nightly routine and I did it every night and it was pretty cool. But I wanted to solve a problem that I was facing in my real life. And I didn't need to be reminded to move my car. I knew to move my car. I was just doing it too much. So I challenge everybody who's watching this video to think about a problem that you have and to really think about how you can engineer a solution to solve that problem. And if you do, please let me know. You can tweet at me at Jessica Garson or send me a message. Also, if you want to see a blog post version of this talk, you can check it out at t.co/parking post. And you can also let us know on Twitter Dev or on the Twitter community forums. Also, if you run into any trouble along the way, folks from my team, including myself, are there to help you on the Twitter community forums. And you can always tweet at us at Twitter Dev. Also, if you're working with the Twitter API and you have feedback for us or there's a feature you want to see, you can give us feedback at twitterdevfeedback.uservoice.com, and that's just if there's something you want to see from the API. Maybe there's a new endpoint that you want, maybe there's an endpoint that you're working with that you wish did something that it doesn't do yet. Please let us know. Also, if you are building with the Twitter API, I'd love to get to know you and have a conversation. Um, Again, feel free to send me a DM or tweet at me. And thanks again for taking the time to watch this video. Thanks and have a great day.